I think we can go ahead and get started now. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Bridget Schull, and I'm the Director for Scholarly Communications, Research and Development at Cambridge University Press, working through the New York office. And I'm here today with Emily Marchant.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm the program manager for our early research site, Cambridge Open Engage, and excited to be speaking to you today.
So thanks everyone for joining. Before we get into our session, the case for opening up collaboration, speed, recognition, and impact, a couple of housekeeping things. So today we have arranged the presentation. We also have some discussion interleaved here. And so we're going to be using a site called Miro, which some of you might be familiar with. I'll post the link in the chat in a moment. So when we're doing the activities, we'll switch over to that shared platform. But if for whatever reason it's not working for you, you are able to then just put the answers to our prompts into the Zoom chat. And our colleague Jo is on the line. She'll be able to transcribe it into Miro for you rather than you having to try to figure it out in a moment. But it's pretty user-friendly and fairly intuitive. So hopefully it works well for everybody. But also, if you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. And I'll either try to respond in the chat as we go, or we'll also have a couple of breaks in which we ask for questions if people want to share them verbally as well. So that's the housekeeping. I think that's it for now. I'll go ahead and jump in then to the presentation. So I looked back at the description of the conference online when I was preparing for this and realized that the organizers had managed to boil down our entire presentation into a few succinct lines, actually. On the site, it says, research takes place in collaborative networks tied together by publications, conferences, informal discussions, and data sharing. Approaching all stages of research more openly will facilitate collaboration and the incremental growth of ideas. Breaking down the walls around information will enable more stakeholders, both lay and professional, to become involved and deepen their trust in research. And I would say that chimes very well with how we've been thinking about things at Cambridge University Press and exactly why we've been focusing in on collaboration to be able to help do exactly that. And so hopefully our presentation will pull back the curtain a little bit on what the research community has said to us directly through things like market research, user feedback on our platforms, and interactions across the many ways we work with the research community through our publishing. And if you attended this morning's opener, you heard Mandy Hill, our managing director, talk about our overall ambitions in open research. So this slide here is just meant to do a little bit of scene setting. So there's a lot happening in as far as emerging trends in open research. This slide absolutely doesn't capture everything, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense about how we're looking at things from the press point of view. So just a few examples. Collaboration is seen as particularly important, especially in interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary research. And open research is seen as having benefits in terms of real world impact, but there are also some concerns about how to best disseminate that content beyond the research community. We have colleagues who are doing another session to talk about some of the benefits of open research, and we'll share some statistics that we've seen from our portfolio. But collaboration is also seen as key to successful research. So while face-to-face interaction continues to be important, especially at conferences, those kind of connections really need to be able to happen in between and outside of the conference as well, virtually, not just because of the pandemic, but just because of the speed and the way that people work. And so that those online tools and platforms have to be clear, easy to use, and intuitive, and that user experience needs to add real value and making workflows more streamlined and supporting open researchers' goals. So that's just a little bit on the emerging trends. On the next slide, so in terms of the collaborative piece, there's a great quote that I saw in The Economist that I thought kind of spoke to this slide, which is, the accumulation of knowledge is in some ways a burden. The more is known, the more researchers must absorb before they can add to the stock of human knowledge. And the more they must collaborate with other researchers to combine their areas of expertise. And what we've seen, over the past few years, past decade and beyond even, is that overall more funding is going towards multidisciplinary research centers. But at the same time, many scholars are still using fairly informal tools around collaboration. And that international and/or interdisciplinary collaboration has seen a steady increase. And that growth of collaboration has been in direct relation to the growth of open access. And while much of collaboration is really valuable to other researchers, it's often siloed from the research itself and the communication around the research itself. On the next slide, we have, so in terms of thinking about kind of why that matters and that case for speed and impact of why collaboration can help speed and impact, the best and most recent example is everything that's happened around COVID-19 on the scholarly communications research space. So, I mean, there's been more open collaboration than ever witnessed before, really, with governments, funders, universities, publishers, and technology services all contributing. So I have just a few examples of what that looks like in our area, including the fact that vast amounts of research was made open, including we had COVID collections that were made open, and examples like ResearchGate's COVID collection. The European Commission launched a COVID-19 data sharing platform for researchers, and MLA Commons opened up a teaching remotely group for sharing syllabi, tools, and asking questions. But I think, the need to collaborate openly and the need for that speed was just recognized as truly essential for us to be able to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And, that was recognized, I think, at the highest levels of government. The G7 science technology ministers issued a declaration on COVID-19, recognizing exactly that, the significance of open science for government-sponsored epidemiological and related research. And, I think that kind of the ways of working, even as the pandemic itself, some of the urgency hopefully will die down around it. How we work has changed forever, and we've seen the benefits of that open collaboration. So I'll pass it over to Emily.
Great. So I think one other kind of angle we wanted to give you in this kind of early section of the presentation around the case for open collaboration is kind of an analogy. So I think if we want to look at how open collaboration has the power to deliver greater speed and quality and innovation, we actually think open source development in software offers a really good analogy for that. So obviously open source software is developed in collaboration between a broad community of developers, and that team is generally constrained only by the aims and the community rules of the project, rather than by individual organizations and other kinds of goal. And so the majority of substantive inputs to developing that software and the discussions around that tend to be made open and visible to that community, not all, but the majority. And when done well, this means benefits, like you can see on this slide here. So quicker identification of use cases, generally lower barriers around inclusivity, whether that's global inclusivity or kind of other kinds. Really, developers can get involved to the extent that they have something valuable to offer the project. And definitely greater efficiency around reuse of novel solutions in the way that that software is shared with kind of open licensing and can be reused as needed, as well as a focus that's really shifted to, I think, impact and quality, rather than the aims, like I said, of a particular organization or individual. It's a great analogy, and these are some benefits that I think we think could be transferred over to areas of research. But it's important to say that successful open source projects really only achieve these benefits if they have an active community, but also really good community management and well-defined aims as part of that, as well as a platform and an infrastructure for hosting all of that activity and kind of making sense of it and structuring it for the participants, which I suppose, again, that's a great analogy, I think, for what we're trying to do at the press in terms of understanding that collaboration has this potential to kind of drive faster and better innovation, but it really needs kind of more formal support in terms of infrastructure and community management than maybe is available right now. Okay, so now that we've talked through some of the context around the case for opening up more of the research collaboration journey, we wanted to kick things off with this first activity. So basically, we want to define our term a little bit more precisely. Collaboration means a lot of things. So as part of our work to understand how we can better aid collaboration, we have attempted recently to split it out into these three distinct categories that you see on the slide. And for our first activity, we're going to ask you what might be missing from these categories, whether they ring true for you in your collaborative work, and what you might add. So as I'm explaining these, have a think about what those ideas might be for you. So what we have come up with is these three areas, starting on the left here. So network collaboration. So by this, we mean the kind of overarching way that researchers discover and share new ideas, meet one another and become familiar with one another's work. So it's the kind of collaboration that situates you in your area of research, helps you initiate new ideas and relationships. And for example, it's the kind of collaboration that you might do at a conference, attending talks, meeting new collaborators, kind of getting a sense of what's going on more broadly in your area of research. Then kind of conversely, we have project collaboration. So this is the kind of nitty-gritty of completing actual research projects. It's sharing documents and insights with the team that you work with. Generally, it's done within the bounds of a particular project, department, or institution. That team might be huge and cross interdisciplinary and international boundaries. It might be a much smaller team, depending on the type of research that you do. But it's generally aimed directly at the pursuit of a particular research question. And the terms of that kind of collaboration in that activity could be dictated somewhat by a research funder or by the kind of constraints of the project in which you're working, depending on the discipline. An example of this would be sharing documents and data across a large international research project where you have, for example, specific laboratory equipment in different places, but need to share data with colleagues working on that project across all of those areas. And then lastly, we have impact collaboration. So in this category, we've been thinking about activities that aim to synthesize research and communicate it more effectively, which is often an effort undertaken by groups of researchers coming from disparate projects. And in some cases, it might also involve collaborators and audiences outside of research entirely. For example, the public, policymakers, or practitioners in industry, medical practitioners, that kind of thing. And an example would be the recent COP26 kind of event and everything that was kind of happening around those negotiations. So that's kind of those are our ideas, and we'd really like to kind of move across now to the Miro board, which Bridget mentioned, and have a bit of a brainstorm about, you know, what's missing, what kind of collaboration do you kind of participate in that either fits under these categories or doesn't. And so you can either go into the Miro directly and add a post-it yourself, or like Bridget said, just type in the chat and we can add things ourselves too. I can see some of you are already here, so I'll make this full screen here.
So the link is in chat and there should be no barriers to getting into the actual Miro board.
And also feel free to unmute as well if you'd like to just comment on that framework we just shared. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, absolutely. We're happy to. We want this to be interactive. And so if there are questions or comments on anything we've said so far, they're very welcome.
I should say too, there's a big blank space at the bottom. So if you don't like the categories that we've proposed, then feel free to throw post-its down there and can take a look at those. Can see everyone's mouse is moving around. Okay, so I can see we've got some things being added here around impact collaboration. So shaping policies, yeah. So I think it's interesting that the kind of impact collaboration piece arguably has the, the most kind of non-researchers involved. I mean, it depends on the discipline, of course. You might have that happening in network collaboration as well, but that's definitely something we can come on to later when we start talking about some of the barriers around these activities. And yeah, I can see someone's added to creating briefings for policymakers. So there is definitely some crossover here in terms of, new outputs being created around impact collaboration. It's not just the synthesis of research and the communication of it. It's also the creation of new content and new documents entirely. And so, you might be doing collaboration around creating those documents too within this category. I can see this one that's a little difficult to read here. Discriminating information in collaboration with. Oh, right, yeah, so this looks like a specific example. Yeah, so I wonder if actually there's sort of a piece, maybe might be a misunderstanding the specific example that's been given here, but there's a piece around involving, I guess, the public, maybe in the creation of new research. So looping right back around to that, that network collaboration in terms of the lived experience advisory groups that somebody has mentioned, possibly with the aim of creating, more primary research in the long term as well. Yeah, so somebody has added under project collaboration, the training of new scholars. I think that's a really interesting one, actually, because I guess all of these categories probably have the potential that bringing early career researchers into that activity is going to have, benefit in terms of training them as well. And some of the examples we'll give later around activities to kind of spur community peer review definitely have that angle to them as well. It's great. And yeah, somebody has added developing novel ideas to network collaboration. I think that's really what we were thinking about when we were thinking about that category, is sort of what's that more amorphous type of activity that happens sort of outside the creation of research outputs, but kind of situates, the research that the individual is doing in that broader piece of the kind of the disciplinary world that you're functioning in. And I think that there's something around network collaboration, and I mean, Bridget's already kind of touched on this, but broadening that network collaboration and making it more visible, I think, is one of the areas where we think there's the greatest potential to increase inclusivity in research as well, because having a sense of, where your research is situated in the broader picture is hugely important for developing those new ideas. And yeah, finding out.
Absolutely. And even bibliometrics even suggests that teams with greater diversity generate papers that make more of a splash in the scientific literature. So, it does drive impact as well. So there's the connection across both of those pieces. If anybody would like to speak to anything they've put on the Miro board before we move on, we'd be happy to hear from you as well. I know Emily has shared out loud some of the things that are there in the Post-its, but if anybody would like to respond, that would be great.
I'll jump in if I may.
Please.
I was the one who put down disseminating research or disseminating information in collaboration with the lived experience advisory groups. And I've actually had a lived experience advisory group working with me from development of the study all the way through the study. And they're actually going to be involved when we disseminate the research findings. So I don't know if that's not appropriate, or is that, am I?
No, that's very much appropriate. I feel like you're kind of spanning our categories there, which is a really interesting example of how, that you can be doing all of these at the same time, right? You can be, and ideally you would be kind of involving the people who, are going to benefit from the research right from the beginning, and who have, great insight about the research you'll be doing.
The other thing I would add is there are some publications that receive very well journal articles that are written in collaboration with PPI groups, with lived experience advisory groups. So people that have been involved in the research from beginning to end are part of your collaboration, part of your collaborators, and they actually have a voice in those articles.
That example will be really interesting in our next activity, actually, to think about how these examples that span multiple categories, what that looks like in terms of challenges. So I think that one will be useful in a few minutes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to respond to any of the post-its or share anything themselves before we move on? No? Okay, well, feel free to keep adding things. I think we can switch back to the slides for a few minutes.
Yep, here we go. Load. Okay, hopefully those are coming through for you now.
Okay, so I'm hoping that it will be valuable to the range of audience members here today to surface some of the insights that came from research we've done, as well as some of the indicators of the case for collaboration from other types of research. So, I mean, I'm simplifying it a bit just so that we don't spend too much time on it, just some high level points. But our research has showed us that many scholars are still using informal tools around collaboration. And a lot of that collaboration is fairly organic, depending on existing networks or utilizing tools like email. So, for example, we found that discussing research findings with peers at a conference comes out as a priority for researchers, and 63% of those surveyed wanted to collaborate more. But early researchers were actually 20% less likely than senior academics to have funding and resources for conferences. So, you know, a lot of that collaboration is happening at conferences, but obviously there's a challenge around access in the first instance, and not just for early career researchers, it's also researchers who are at less well-funded institutions or potentially independent as well. And so the pressure to find a complement to that conference model has been building and building for years. But I think, you know, the pandemic has really only made it more critical that we find new ways to provide feedback and build networks and workshop research findings in advance of publication or alongside publication as well. You know, there's what's changed so much about that kind of scholarly communications loop is that it's not a loop, it's not linear in the same way that it used to be, that it's, to use the kind of buzzword of the pandemic, it's asynchronous in many ways. And so a lot of those types of things are happening actually simultaneously. And so to be able to kind of surface that provides a lot of value to the research community, but also what our research has told us is that we need to support that in new and different ways. So in the scholarly communications ecosystem, we've also seen funder calls for more open forms of publication, critiques of traditional publishing venues, from scholar-led initiatives and from funders, and then also the rapid and fairly massive growth of the sharing of preprints and other kinds of early research. And interdisciplinary research is especially inherently collaborative, and this kind of research is getting more funding as a direct proportion of research overall. So supporting collaboration through digital tools isn't synonymous with openness itself, of course, but at the press, we've been pursuing this under the banner of openness because we believe that most kinds of collaboration are more visible when more valuable when they're visible to other researchers. And we've taken this position in part because the research that we've done has demonstrated that a majority of academics believe that collaboration is seen to improve the quality of research. And that open research is also seen as a means to increase quality of research, not just as a way to increase speed. And so that's been really helpful for us, some of that market research and some of the focus groups that we've done, for highlighting that feedback, advice, and validation is really key for researchers who are new to doing interdisciplinary work or who are working alone, especially. And so other pieces of more targeted research we've done have also highlighted this approach, but from different directions. So for example, when we did a survey to a group of over 200 researchers working across disciplines in climate change, and they were asked what an effective community of climate change researchers would look like to them, two of the key themes shared were the importance of a global community with a shared common goal, as well as supporting multiple content types on a shared platform. And so what we were hearing back from that research was that there are some kind of channels for the traditional content types, but less of a place for that kind of multiplicity of content types or multiplicity of scholarly dialogues that are happening around content. So on the next slide, you'll see, yes, so what the persona shown here. So personas is a tool that companies use for platform development. You may or may not be familiar with that, but basically a lot of market research is kind of aggregated to create personas that represent the users of the platform themselves. And then you create a lot around their motivations, around the work that they need to do on the platform, and around the goals that they're trying to accomplish in order to make sure your development really meets those needs. And so these are the personas that we had developed a few years back. But I think why I wanted to share this is just because it does aggregate some of the thoughts that came through the market research that we've done over the years as well. And so you can see that our personas have shown us that they want to get feedback on initial stages of research design so that their research will help to find an audience and help to build their profile. That researchers want to be able to find collaborators in their field from other institutions, to be able to discuss perspectives and share new insights, and also to be able to establish if an early research idea has already been explored, and if so, change direction or potentially join forces depending on what makes the most sense. The next slide. So, of course, there are multiple barriers to collaboration, whether in person or digitally. And this slide shows just what was surfaced through some of that market research about what our respondents view as the biggest challenges. A piece of research that we did last summer with over 1,000 humanities and social science scholars gave us the data point of 80% of respondents had published or contributed to peer-reviewed journal articles, followed by 69% for books and book chapters, but with only 9% for the sharing of preprints. And so, some of the barriers to sharing that early research still revolves around concerns about getting scooped or misunderstood or fear of negative feedback. And that kind of link to the credit needs to be given on an ongoing basis were due to those that generated and worked on research data was also driving why some of that early research sharing was down. And so we thought it would be helpful to hear a little bit more from you all about what the barriers to collaboration are currently, and whether what we heard through our market research, whether you would agree with that, whether you would revise any of that or add to that. So we can go back to the Miro, and we have a section on the Miro for the barriers. So if you move slightly to the right, you'll see the header at the top that says, what are the barriers to collaboration currently? We went ahead and broke it down by the categories we'd already been discussing. But that being said, that might not be how you see the world. So we have an other category, and you can feel free to add things in wherever you think it's most relevant. But we thought it'd be helpful just to hear a little bit more about the barriers. And to go back to the example of the advisory boards from a minute ago, because that example spanned multiple categories, it'd be interesting to hear if the barriers are unique or what that looks like potentially. So we'll give you a few minutes.
See that we have a couple of additions here that, sorry, go ahead, Bridget.
No, it's okay. We just both came off mute at exactly the same moment. So I was just going to play back a few things that are being posted in the board, but it looks like some of the thoughts around barriers are opportunities for meeting with researchers in other institutions. So if I can extrapolate a little bit, it sounds like there's good opportunities within an institution. So within Cambridge, for example, but that gets a lot harder when you're looking across institutions, but that there would be benefits to that. A lack of confidence to go and start conversations with more senior academics. I know I've heard exactly that from many early career researchers that I've spoken with, and I know that there's some support around that, but I think unless you're explicitly working within a session or some sort of an event that has been set up for that, then that can be very very challenging and very daunting. There are differences in IT systems being used. I mean, we are all part of the same overall organization, and I could not get into the teams that prep to this conference for the life of us. And so I can only imagine it gets worse when you're working across multiple institutions. And so, yes, absolutely, IT challenges. And early career researchers having the confidence to request, oh, I'm sorry, that's actually repeating the same one above. So we're seeing that in both categories here. There's also a difference in motivation levels for projects, which can cause delays, which is interesting. But extrapolating a little bit there, then it sounds to me like that's there's always people who have the kind of lead roles, but then there's not necessarily people working at the same rate or with the same urgency, and there's obviously other priorities pulling in people in different directions. So sometimes that can really have a negative impact on the project itself. And for impact collaboration, I see acquiring funding to support collaborations with multiple partners. So that makes a lot of sense why that would be a barrier. And down in our other category, we have other tasks seen as priorities and a limited time budget. So yes, I would say in basically any market research we ever do at the press, then a common pain point for researchers is just being time poor. Researchers are pulled in many, many, many directions. And so that's always a barrier to trying to do something new or do something in a new way. Would anyone like to add any detail around what they've put on the board or share anything that's not on the board? See, a couple of things have been added. Protection of IP rights. That one does come up a lot, and I think that connects to what we had on our slides, so the fear of being scooped or fear of being plagiarized, and which interestingly, in terms of some of the conversations we've had or the research itself, is that we hear that from both directions, which is we hear that concern, but we also hear some people using tools like preprint servers actually because they consider it as a timestamp to put their name on their research in advance of publication. So it looks like that can work from both directions. Camise, is that the correct pronunciation?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you
No, I was just going to add in, because one of the things that I put up, and I think someone else put it up separately in the other section, was the part about researchers struggling with the confidence to approach higher level researchers in requested collaboration. And I've been very fortunate in that I have, in my PhD study, managed to reach out to some fairly high profile researchers and gotten support from them. But I think part of that comes from coming from a different background. So I come from a professional sales background. And so for me, that wasn't a challenge, but I can definitely see, and what I found is that many of even the higher profile researchers, if you put something very viable in front of them that you've put a lot of thought into, that they're more than willing to collaborate. And it's just a matter of taking the step of asking for it. But I feel like where a lot of my colleagues, that are maybe younger, not coming from a business background, might really benefit is by getting some training in how to start those conversations and how to reach out and initiate that.
That's a really interesting perspective, because you're right. That's not something that your average academic would necessarily be thinking about it. But from a sales background, that's kind of square one, right? To be able to do that outreach, to be able to either make a pitch or make that connection. And so that's a really interesting perspective that you're coming from. Thanks for sharing that. Is there anything else anyone would like to add any detail around before we go back up to our slides? Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for putting the Post-its there. So I'll pass it back to Emily.
I will share this again. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm just going to skip through these slides here. Sorry about that. Great. So I wanted to start this section of the presentation by giving an example of the project that I work on, which is Cambridge Open Engage, and it's our early research site at Cambridge University Press. And we're going to talk in this section through a couple of different examples, some Cambridge University Press examples and some outside of the press in terms of what the scholarly comms industry is doing to sort of spur like a new generation of kind of collaborative tools. So to talk a little bit about Engage, just to give an introduction to what it is first. So this is one example of what we're trying to do to spur and facilitate collaboration. The site offers rapid dissemination of early and open research outputs. So it's not just a preprint server, although we do offer hosting of working papers and preprints, but we also offer hosting of research reports, conference posters, presentations, and we're looking to kind of expand those content types all the time so that there's just greater facility for researchers to share outputs that are kind of possibly outside the traditional publication route. Overall, of that, we've got versioning and commenting now to facilitate feedback and collaboration. And I'll talk a bit about what we've been doing to kind of expand that, or what we're planning to do to expand that in a couple of slides' time. We also offer Engage as a hosting service to organizations like societies so that they can offer a similar kind of open collaborative platform to their communities. We know that, you know, for example, when I was talking about open source, we mentioned that these areas need community engagement, and kind of sometimes that happens better in a kind of disciplinary area, or an area that kind of already has a very active community. And so many of the organizations we work with currently are learned societies who are kind of offering this infrastructure to their existing communities to kind of spur that collaborative work. One of the things we did as part of COVID-19 with Engage is begin to offer specific areas where researchers can share outputs from events, as more events obviously became virtual as part of the pandemic. And we saw, I think, sort of beyond that kind of temporary service to offer during the pandemic, we did see that there were opportunities to bring much broader benefits to conferences by hosting these outputs with some solid scholarly communications infrastructure and kind of discoverability behind them. Because it means that those who can't attend the conference itself, you know, whether that's because they're time poor or they don't have the funds to attend, or that kind of thing, can access the outputs and still provide that kind of feedback to the authors of those outputs. And then authors in the same vein can go on to version that research after the event based on that feedback. And that research becomes citable and able to kind of accrue impact and metrics sort of outside the bounds of the conference itself. So we've continued to offer this service, and we've been seeing some really interesting kind of interest in those outputs way beyond, you know, what would usually be attracted by the kind of standard conference space. So here are some examples. We've hosted quite a few events specifically from the university on Engage in this way, as well as some other organizations. And we've seen some really great reach from doing that. You know, you can see here we've had a climate change all the way through to linguistics, all the way through to a conference on kind of best practices in scholarly communications. And that's just some of the examples of the event outputs that we've hosted that have really seen that reach, you know, beyond the usual conference bounds. And just another example, here's our Cambridge Language Sciences event, and you can see sort of how the pages are structured. So beyond what we're currently offering, which I've just talked through, which is hosting, dissemination, events and commentary on Engage, we're now planning to kind of boost that collaborative utility of the platform by adding new spaces called communities. So the idea with these is that they'll bring together broad communities of researchers working in interdisciplinary fields. And in doing that, we'll augment the kind of informal collaboration tools like social media with a fit for purpose area where researchers can share their work, discuss ideas, discuss practices in the kind of the research area, things like, you know, what's effective for public engagement, for example, in our research area, and also find new collaborators. So we'll be kicking this off with a community for climate change and sustainability, where we're going to draw together researchers from across, you know, humanities all the way through to atmospheric sciences, so that the real broad spectrum of researchers involved in that area on a kind of free to use platform that offers that infrastructure for collaboration. In all of those categories we've spoken about so far. So we'll do things like, you know, concretely, we'll have features like curated and moderated discussion threads, communities of practice where researchers can share resources and lessons they've learned around topics of importance to professional development. So Camise, you know, your example around how is it best to reach out to new collaborators, that kind of thing, that kind of meta skills for research. Content alerts and invitations, ability to invite people to comment on your work, and the ability to find and follow new contributors. So we think that a service like this has the potential to bring a few benefits, like breaking down some of those disciplinary boundaries, facilitating faster collaboration and hopefully therefore faster development of new ideas, and driving the impact of participants' research as well, actually, both through broader dissemination to, you know, broader open dissemination through that platform, and the ability to kind of gain feedback and insights from others, which should hopefully, you know, drive up the quality of that research too. And we think that especially in an area like climate change and sustainability, that a community on Engage could spur more impact collaboration. So that specific area around public engagement, policymaker engagement, by getting researchers together to establish the best ways to do that and to synthesize research to do that. So I'll hand back over to Bridget to talk about another example.
Great, absolutely. So another area in which we've been trying to respond to that feedback that we've had, and also just the ways in which the world is changing, is a new journal concept called Research Directions. And so Research Directions it's a series of journals, or a set of journals, I should say, that will publish high quality, high impact, open access research with a global reach, but will be targeting interdisciplinary subject areas. And the idea is that the author will respond to field-specific curated research questions or hypotheses. So unlike traditional journals, which are structured around a descriptive scope, authors publishing in Research Directions will be invited to publish research that takes incremental steps to answering a set of distinct research questions, which are then intended to be definitive to a specific field. So the resulting published output is then broken down into discrete parts. So results, analysis, impact, each of which will be indexed, each of which will receive a DOI, and is considered a published and citable research item. These published research outputs will sit on the journal platform and will link through DOIs to outputs uploaded on researchers on Engage, which Emily was just talking about. So outputs that are not formally part of a standard journal research output, such as preprints or data sets or software descriptions or research posters or community briefs, would be on Engage, but would be linked. And so we would be able to give visibility to the entire research journey as it progresses. You can go to the next slide, Emily. And so the idea is that Research Directions will be embedded in subject communities, and that those questions will be debated and refined by the community. And so that kind of collaborative piece that will happen on Engage will be able to be something that the community can really engage with and really be able to see and reference in the future as well. So that would be made visible and stay visible. And then that editorial oversight that Cambridge is known for would also happen, and we would have that kind of connection to the final published, finished piece. So the overall aim is to bring stakeholders together to answer problems that no one community would be able to answer in isolation. So hopefully this gives you a little bit more of a sense of the concept on the next slide as well. Just to kind of summarize it. So what we see as the benefits based on the feedback from researchers are that the questions by hosting those and making those available online will provide a direction for research, and that would distribute credit more evenly as well. So that recognition piece that's part of the title of this session really ties in here. And then that you're able to foster those kind of important connections and collaborations at an earlier stage. And that interconnected open research model of published outputs and uploaded outputs enables researchers to be able to kind of show in real time the complex picture of their work, and opens up those early stages of research to interrogation and constructive input. And by making that all available under the kind of framework of open research, it hopefully will make the research itself more reproducible, more collaborative, more accessible, and more transparent. So that's research directions. And then on the next slide, I will pass it back to Emily.
Yeah, so just some final examples. There are so many to share just in terms of what people are doing across the scholarly communications ecosystem. And here are some non-press examples. So first, a couple of platforms or sites that are doing interesting things and spurring collaboration through offering technology. So the first one, the Center for Open Science, provides an open source platform, and they've built that to facilitate mostly that kind of project collaboration piece, but a little bit of the other two as well, with both public and private features that allow researchers to fully manage a research project from start to finish, and also do the kind of dissemination around that throughout. So they've got a really good focus. The reason that I pulled COS out in particular around integrating with other well-used services and tools in the scholarly commons ecosystem, whether that's consumer tools used by researchers and the rest of us, like Google Drive and Dropbox and those kinds of things, GitHub, that kind of thing, all the way through to services that are very specifically designed for the research world, like Crossref and ORCID, which offers researcher identifiers. A second example, Humanities Commons. So this is built by the Modern Languages Association, MLA, and based on their kind of popular platform, MLA Commons, that came before it, because researchers were asking them to broaden out the scope of MLA Commons to humanities, which shows the kind of value that the platform has had. And this is really a place to aid kind of network and project collaboration across the humanities. So it has a content repository, discussion areas, as well as the ability for users to build their own kind of private or public group sites for specific projects. And I think as of last week when I looked, it has over 28,000 members in its directory. So it's really achieved great scale, especially for something like this in the humanities since its launch in 2016. So that's a couple of platforms. I did also want to mention, I think it's always really important to kind of balance the technology and the infrastructure piece with the kind of community management and engagement and all of that activity that has to happen off a platform to make these projects successful. And here's a couple of examples of that. So Pre-Lights is run by the Company of Biologists, and it's a project that facilitates early career researchers to review and comment notable preprints in biology are chosen with DOIs, and so they recognise and credit that input from
Emily, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but you're frozen on our end. Is she frozen for everyone else? Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, so why don't we'll put a pause on these slides, and when her internet is working better, we can come back around to her few talking points. But what we can do is actually move back to the Miro instead, and we'll close the loop in a minute. Sorry about that. My Wi-Fi went out right before this session, so it's just that kind of day, but that's okay. So in the Miro, we have the last section. We thought it would be interesting to hear from you a little bit more about how thinking about some of these challenges, these barriers from the lens of open research and open access, how does opening up some of the parts of collaboration and research actually address some of those barriers, and what that looks like to you? But also it'd be helpful to hear what principles you think should guide that kind of collaboration, and how should working together feel. And further down in the Miro, we have a couple more questions, which are, what kind of features would you like to see in a digital open environment? So if that collaboration is being done in that digital open environment. So we gave you some examples of what Cambridge University Press has been working on, and got through part of the examples in the external environment. And so, wanted to give you a little bit of a frame of reference, but even though we didn't get through all of Emily's slides, hopefully this question would still be clear of what kind of features do you think are most important for those kind of new tools being designed? And or if there are examples of open collaboration in research that you think work really well already, it would be great to raise awareness of those. So that's the section there for posting or for discussion, if anybody would like to talk about any of that out loud.
Hey, I'm back, everybody. So sorry about that. Zoom just me, but I'm back.
Great, Emily. I said we would loop back around to your slides, and we just moved ahead to the activity. So we'll come back to finish your slides in a minute.
Great.
I don't know how much you could hear. Maybe you heard that. While people are considering, I'd be interested to hear if some of those challenges around, as an early career researcher, reaching out to more senior scholars, if that feels different in that digital environment, if it's different to making that personal connection, to being able to, invite comments, or to be able to write to somebody online in a different way. Like, does that feel any different in that digital environment than it does in I realize you might be connecting through email, it's still digital, but that's much more of a kind of one-to-one than maybe on a platform environment. Well, if anyone has any thoughts on that, feel free to share. Well, while people are typing, I don't know if you wanted to share any more of your talking points. I just I'm conscious of time, so I wanted to give you a chance to finish that, but also save a few minutes for questions.
I think that I could just very quickly say that the last project that I was going to share was pre-review, which again, it's facilitating peer review on preprints. They do a really good job. I think if anyone here is interested in what review looks like in a world where preprints are more, kind of fundamental to the research journey, then definitely check out pre-review. They do a lot of training and kind of community projects and facilitation around reviewing preprints. And I know a lot of kind of early career researchers find their guidelines just very interesting from the perspective of getting up to speed on how to conduct a peer review. So that was the last example.
Thank you. Well, I'm not seeing a lot coming in on this last section in terms of the sticky notes, but I suppose that is not entirely surprising, considering it's a lot easier to identify the challenges and the barriers than it is to identify the solutions. So I appreciate that the questions that we've posed are somewhat challenging. But that being said, if people have thoughts, then you're still welcome to contribute to the Miro board after this session. But I know we only have a few minutes left, and so I wanted to give you a chance to ask any questions overall about the information in our slides or anything that Cambridge University Press is working on right now. Feel free to either put them in the chat or put your hand up. There had been a question before asking about sharing some more information on the climate change and sustainability community. So I did put a link into the chat about our pre-launch page. And so that's where more information will be coming as we get some work done on that. Okay, Lizzie Sparrow, I see your hand is up.
Hi, I've got a quick question about the communities that you were talking about. To what extent do they integrate with any other systems? So does it link into researchers' ORCID? Can it link into other repositories in any way? What have you planned for there?
Yes, so the integrations currently are ORCID IDs, absolutely. And so you can log in using your ORCID. If you have one, then that would be associated with any of the content that you put into the site. So that's definitely fully integrated, as well as then FundRef, DOIs. So all of that kind of metadata is then connected. We're also integrated with Crossref. So if somebody posts a preprint to the site, for example, then you can navigate easily to that version of record once the content is published. Even if it's not on our own platform, if it's with another publisher, then that functionality and that integration with Crossref enables that kind of easy navigation and user experience. So those are a few integrations that we have currently. But that being said, understanding how and where we need to integrate into the infrastructure moving forward is very high on our list and something we're keen to learn from the university about.
Yeah, and I'll mention Altmetric as well, given that I think at the moment we integrate with Altmetric from it's a service that aggregates attention that a content item has had on social media or in the news and that kind of thing. But I think there's a kind of broader opportunity there that we're looking into around how can we surface more of that activity that's happening, possibly outside of the community, which is collaborative activity on the community itself, and to what extent is that for researchers. So that's, I think, something we're looking at for the future.
Thanks. So if there are other integrations that you think are essential, then we'd either be happy to hear them or feel free to put them in the chat. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, well, that's the hour. And so thank you so much for joining and for taking a collaborative approach to talking about collaboration in open research. It's been really nice to be able to see and hear a little bit more about what this looks like from your perspective. And feel free to follow up with any questions. I believe our last slide, Emily, has our email addresses. I don't know if you want to put that back up for a moment, but we're happy to hear from anybody, and good luck with the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great to hear from you all today.